The heavy doors of Orion Station's docking bay hissed open, releasing a wave of pressurized air that carried the scent of burnt plasma coils, overcooked protein rations, and the faint metallic tang of fear. The moment Zira stepped onto the deck, the noise of the bustling port dimmed, conversations cut short, footsteps hesitated, and all eyes flicked in her direction before quickly darting away. Zira was used to it. She moved forward, each step deliberate, the reinforced soles of her boots clicking against the steel-plated floor with the kind of confidence that made people nervous. The long, pointed ears that marked her as other twitched slightly as she caught snippets of hushed whispers. That's her, the Butcher of Xiphos. She took down an entire battalion on Nerith Prime. I heard she doesn't sleep, just waits in the dark until her next kill. Zira suppressed a sigh. The stories never got old, only more absurd. The truth was far less dramatic. Yes, she was a warrior. Yes, she had fought in battles across the galaxy. But did she drink the blood of her enemies? Number. That one was particularly ridiculous, considering she preferred spiced nebula tea. The crowd parted like a fluid organism, people stepping aside instinctively, avoiding her gaze. Fear. It clung to them, thick as engine grease. Normally Zira ignored it, moving through whatever spaceport, battlefield, or political summit she had to endure. But today something was different. Someone wasn't moving out of her way. A human man stood in the middle of the walkway, holding a large, beat-up crate that looked like it had been through one too many trips through an atmosphere unfit for landing. He was tall but lean, his brown hair a tousled mess, his jacket stained with something that looked suspiciously like oil, but smelled more like disappointment. Unlike everyone else, he didn't shrink back or scuttle away. Instead, he looked at her, sighed dramatically, and shifted the crate in his arms. "Oh, fantastic," he muttered. "Another galactic terror blocking my way. My day just keeps getting better." Zira blinked. She wasn't sure what was more shocking, the fact that he wasn't cowering in fear or the sheer exhaustion in his voice. She tilted her head slightly, examining him. He didn't wear a soldier's uniform, nor did he have the hardened stance of a bounty hunter. No weapons, no armor, no telltale marks of an assassin, just a hauler. Interesting. She took a slow step forward, watching for the moment recognition might flicker in his eyes, the moment fear would set in. But it never came. He just groaned, adjusting his grip on the crate. "Listen, lady," he said, not unkindly but definitely impatiently. "I've had a long day, and my arms are about 5 minutes away from falling off. So, unless you plan on moving, I'm either going to drop this crate on your boots or on my own foot, and I gotta be honest, I don't love either option." For the first time in a long, long while, Zira felt something entirely unfamiliar: confusion. She narrowed her eyes, crossing her arms over her chest. "Everyone is afraid of me," she said, her voice low, steady, edged with the quiet weight of a reputation earned through war and bloodshed. "But why aren't you afraid of me, human?" The man blinked, as if only now registering the gravity of the situation. He looked her up and down, taking in her armor, her stance, the unmistakable aura of someone who had walked through fire and left the ashes behind. Then, to her absolute bewilderment, he shrugged. "You ever had a cargo hold depressurize mid-flight?" he asked. Zira frowned. "No." "Well, I have," he said. "Ever had to explain to a customs officer why half your shipment of planetary grain is now floating somewhere in deep space?" "No." "Ever been yelled at by a foreman who just found out their entire order of Syntha-Coffee was replaced by 100 crates of industrial lubricants because some idiot mislabeled the cargo?" Zira hesitated. "No." "Then congratulations," the man said, shifting his crate again. "You are not the most terrifying thing I've dealt with today." There was a beat of silence. Zira simply stared. The man adjusted his grip again, exhaled, then finally gave up and set the crate down with an unceremonious thud. He stretched his arms with an audible crack, then offered her a hand. "Max Carter," he said. "Professional hauler, part-time problem magnet, and full-time survivor of ridiculous workplace disasters." Zira glanced at his outstretched hand, then at his face. He had the kind of expression that suggested he had long ago resigned himself to the absurdity of the universe and had simply decided to roll with it. Slowly she reached out, shaking his hand firmly. "Zira," she said. "Nice to meet you, Zira," Max said. "Now, unless you're about to kill me, I'd really like to get this crate to Dock C-17 before my client docks my pay." Zira considered that. She could kill him if she wanted, but she didn't. For the first time in a long time, she found herself curious. She released his hand. "I will walk with you." Max arched a brow. "Oh, okay, sure. No offense, but you do know people are currently staring at me like I've just befriended an apex predator, right?" Zira glanced at the onlookers. Some had their mouths open. A few looked like they might faint. She turned back to Max. "That is not my problem." "Fair enough," he said, picking up his crate. "But if I get thrown out of a bar later because of this, I'm blaming you." Zira smirked. A small one, but it was there. Noted. And with that, the most feared warrior in the galaxy, and a cargo hauler with terrible luck, walked side by side through Orion Station, leaving behind a crowd of bewildered, speechless onlookers who would be talking about this moment for weeks to come. Max Carter was pretty sure he was making a terrible life decision. It wasn't every day you found yourself walking side by side with a living legend. Scratch that, a living nightmare, if you listen to the rumors. Zira, the butcher of Xiphos. The woman whose name was whispered in hushed voices across 1,000 worlds, and here he was, escorting her through Orion Station like she was just another crew member on his hauler. No big deal. Just another Tuesday. Max grunted as he adjusted the crate in his arms, his muscles protesting the effort. "You know," he muttered, "for someone who's supposedly terrifying, you're surprisingly quiet. I keep expecting you to growl at me or declare that I am unworthy to walk in your presence." Zira tilted her head slightly, her long ears twitching at his words. "Would you prefer that?" "Not really," Max admitted. "I feel like I'd just embarrass both of us if I screamed and ran." Zira made a sound that might have been amusement. Then again, it might have just been the way her armor shifted as she walked. Hard to tell. As they moved deeper into the station, the reactions around them varied between outright panic and morbid curiosity. People whispered into their comm units, shopkeepers lowered protective shutters, and one particularly dramatic traveler gasped, clutched his chest, and fainted against a noodle stand. Max sighed. "Do people always react to you like this?" "Yes." "That's got to be exhausting." Zira shrugged. "It is efficient. I rarely have to wait in line." Max opened his mouth to argue, but quickly realized she had a point. "Okay, yeah, that's actually a perk. Still, you ever just wish people saw you as something other than galactic menace extraordinaire?" Zira didn't answer right away. Instead, she glanced at the flashing neon sign of a small eatery advertising fresh synth meat, only slightly toxic, and nodded toward it. "Are those edible?" Max followed her gaze. "The food? Technically. What does technically mean?" "It means you won't die immediately, but you'll definitely regret it." Zira considered this. "I will try one." Max blinked. "Wait, what?" She was already walking toward the stand. The owner, a four-armed Gorthian with pale blue skin and a face that looked like it had lost several bets with a plasma cutter, let out a strangled noise when he saw her. "Are you Zira the butcher?" Zira placed a single credit chip on the counter. "I would like one of your technically edible food items." The Gorthian made a choked squeak and immediately began preparing something at a speed Max had never seen before. It was like watching a hyperspace jump, but with significantly more sizzling grease and panic. Max rubbed his temples. "This is going to be a whole thing, isn't it?" A minute later, the Gorthian shakily handed Zira a wrapped synth meat skewer. She inspected it with the same level of scrutiny Max imagined she gave a new enemy's battle strategy, then took a bite. Silence. The entire street seemed to be holding its breath. Then Zira chewed, swallowed, nodded once. "It is adequate." The Gorthian's knees nearly buckled in relief. Max, meanwhile, just stared at her in horror. "You actually ate that?" "Do you want to suffer later?" Zira took another bite. "I have endured worse." Max shook his head. "Lady, if you survive that, I'm adding stomach of steel to your list of terrifying attributes." Before Zira could respond, Max's comm unit buzzed. He sighed, juggling the crate to free a hand, and tapped the side of his earpiece. "Carter, if you don't get that shipment to Dock C-17 in the next 5 minutes, I swear I will personally jettison you into the nearest sun." The familiar voice of his boss, Captain Relo, crackled over the line. Max winced. "Hey, Cap, funny story." "No funny stories, no excuses, no distractions." Rilo's voice was getting dangerously close to the "I will actually murder you" tone. "Move your ass, Carter," Max sighed. "On it." He ended the call and turned to Zira. "Well, terrifying space warrior lady, as much as I'm enjoying this delightful stroll, I gotta get this delivery in before my boss has an aneurysm." Zira nodded. "Then we should move faster." Max was about to agree when something felt off. The hair on the back of his neck stood up. Zira must have sensed it too because she tensed, eyes narrowing as she scanned the street, and then, from the corner of his eye, Max spotted them. A group of figures, dressed in dark armor, lingering too casually at the entrance of an alley, watching them. Bounty hunters. Max exhaled sharply. "Ah, great. I don't suppose these guys are old friends of yours." Zira's expression darkened. "No." The bounty hunters stepped forward. The leader, a tall humanoid with a scar across his cheek and a grin that made Max instantly dislike him, stopped a few feet away. "Well, well," the man said, his voice smug. "The galaxy's most wanted warrior, just wandering around a space station like she doesn't have 100 contracts on her head. That's bold." Zira didn't respond. She just stared at him with the kind of gaze that could probably make a star implode. The bounty hunter chuckled. "Tell you what, you make this easy, and I won't have to blast half this street apart dragging you in." Max cleared his throat. Question, if half the street gets blasted, do I get hazard pay?" The bounty hunter turned his glare to Max. "Who the hell are you?" "Just a guy trying to make a delivery, but I have a vested interest in not getting shot today, so—" Max gestured vaguely at Zira. "Any chance you guys could schedule this attempted kidnapping for, like, next Tuesday? I hear Tuesdays are great for bounty collections." One of the hunters actually looked confused for a second. The leader, however, just sneered. "You've got guts, human. Too bad you're standing next to a dead woman." Zira's lip curled slightly. "You assume much." And then she moved. It was fast, too fast. Before the bounty hunters could react, she closed the distance between them, grabbed the leader by the wrist, and twisted. A sickening crack echoed through the air as he howled in pain. Chaos erupted. Max barely had time to dodge as blaster fire zipped past his head. "Oh, why does this always happen to me?" Zira, meanwhile, was already dismantling the attackers with terrifying efficiency. One was sent sprawling with a brutal kick, another crumpled after a well-placed elbow to the ribs. Max watched as one hunter tried to run. He sighed, muttering to himself, "They never learn." Sure enough, Zira threw a knife that embedded itself in the man's shoulder. He went down like a malfunctioning drone. Silence fell. Max exhaled. "Well, that happened." Zira stepped over one of the groaning bodies. "You should finish your delivery." Max stared at her, then at the unconscious bounty hunters, then back at her. "You know what? Yeah, let's do that." And with that, they walked away, leaving a very, very confused street full of spectators behind. Max Carter had officially decided that today was one of his top 5 worst days, and that was saying something, considering he once had to explain to a customs officer why his cargo manifest said medical supplies, when, in reality, he was transporting a shipment of highly illegal, highly explosive fireworks for a festival on Tarsus 9. For the record, it wasn't his fault, mostly. But this was worse. Because Max had just watched Zira take down a squad of bounty hunters like she was swatting away a mild inconvenience, and now they were casually walking toward Dock C-17 like nothing happened, like she hadn't just broken several arms and possibly a rib cage or two. And the worst part? No one was stopping them. The people of Orion Station had already perfected the fine art of minding their own business, which, Max had to admit, was a trait he usually appreciated. Right now, however, it was giving him a deep sense of existential dread. because this meant that the galaxy's most dangerous warrior was now his problem. He shifted the weight of the crate in his arms and sighed. "So, just checking, you don't have, like, I don't know, a horde of bounty hunters secretly tracking your every move, do you?" Zira gave him a sidelong glance. "If I did, would you still be walking beside me?" Max considered this. "Well, I am already in too deep, so probably," she nodded, seemingly satisfied with that answer. Max exhaled sharply, muttering under his breath, "Yeah, great. That's what I was afraid of." As they neared the docking bay, a heavy-set security droid stationed at the entrance scanned them with an eerie blue light. Its bulky frame was covered in dented plating, the paint peeling in places, and it had the general demeanor of a bureaucratic worker who had long ago lost any enthusiasm for its job. "State your purpose." Max held up the crate. "Delivery for Dock C-17. Don't suppose you feel like letting us through without—" The droid immediately cut him off with a droning beep. "Cargo inspection required. Stand by for scanning." Max groaned. "Oh, come on. I have 5 minutes before my boss throttles me, and you want to scan my crate? For what? Do I look like someone smuggling illegal goods?" The droid beeped again. "Statistics indicate that 42.7% of individuals attempting to bypass cargo scans use similar arguments." Max scowled. "Oh, you suck." Zira, meanwhile, simply stepped forward and fixed the droid with an expression of cool indifference. "Are we finished here?" The droid hesitated. Then, almost imperceptibly, its servos whirred in a way that almost sounded like nervousness. "Processing. Processing. Clearance granted. Please proceed." Max gawked as the droid actually stepped aside, granting them entry. "Wait, what? That's it? That's all it took?" Zira walked forward without hesitation. "Efficiency." Max let out a slow, incredulous laugh. "I have wasted years arguing with station security, and you just stared at it and won?" Zira didn't respond, probably because she didn't need to. As they entered Dock C-17, Max's ship, the Lucky Break, came into view. It was a freighter in the loosest definition of the word, covered in mismatched panels, dented from what Max insisted were mild accidents and not a series of terrible decisions. And standing at the base of the loading ramp, arms crossed, was Captain Relo. Relo was an Orion-born ex-smuggler with the temperament of a woman who had long since lost patience for nonsense. Her silver hair was pulled back into a loose bun, and her sharp violet eyes locked onto Max with the intensity of a plasma cutter. "You're late," she said. Max grinned, setting the crate down with a thunk. "Technically, I am on time because I just got here, and therefore Relo held up a finger. "Before you say another word, why is Zira the butcher standing next to you, like she's your new co-pilot?" Max opened his mouth, closed it, looked at Zira, then back at Relo. Relo's expression remained flat. "That's the best you got?" Zira, meanwhile, remained completely unfazed. "I required an escort," she said simply. Relo narrowed her eyes. "Max is not an escort." Max raised a finger. "Okay, but to be fair, I did successfully escort her here, so technically—" "Shut up." Max shut up. Relo let out a long, suffering sigh and pinched the bridge of her nose. "All right, you know what? I don't even want to know. If she's not here to kill us, that's good enough for me." Zira nodded once. "I am not." "Fantastic," Relo said dryly. Then she turned back to Max. "Unload that crate, Carter. Now." Max gave a quick salute. "Aye, aye, Captain. Right away, Captain. Totally on it, Captain." He started moving, hauling the crate up the ramp while muttering to himself about unfair workplace conditions. Zira watched him go, then turned back to Relo. "He is unusual." Relo snorted. "That's one way to put it." She studied Zira for a moment. "So, what's your deal? Why are you walking around with a hauler like him?" Zira considered the question. It wasn't that she didn't have an answer. It was just that she wasn't entirely sure what the answer was. Finally, she settled on, "I was curious." Relo arched a brow. "Curious? About Max?" Zira nodded. Relo chuckled. "Lady, you must have seen some weird things in your life. But if Max Carter is what makes you curious, you're in for one hell of a time. Zyra didn't disagree. As Max returned, wiping his hands on his jacket, he grinned. Okay, Captain. Cargo's unloaded. No bounty hunters have jumped me yet, and I haven't been shot at in the last 5 minutes. I'd say that's a solid win. Relo gave him a long look. I can still shoot you myself. Max sighed. Every time with this. As Zyra watched them banter, something about the lucky break and its ridiculous crew made her pause. Maybe, just maybe, she had found something worth staying for. Max Carter had a lot of regrets in life. There was the time he tried to sweet-talk a customs officer and ended up in a holding cell for 3 days because he accidentally flirted with their spouse. There was the incident with the exploding soup canisters on Rigel 6, which, to this day, he swore was not entirely his fault. And then there was the time he bet a whole paycheck on a game of Farakian roulette without knowing that the Farakians had 3 dice instead of 2. But right now, his biggest regret was letting Zyra onto his ship, because the moment they took off from Orion Station, Max realized something very important. Zyra didn't know how to relax. She stood in the middle of the Lucky Break's cramped common area like a statue carved from solid menace, arms crossed, long ears twitching slightly as she surveyed the ship's interior, like she expected a hidden assassin to leap from behind the coffee machine. Max, currently busy recalibrating the ship's nav system, let out a long sigh and finally turned to her. So, do you, want to sit down? Maybe drink something that isn't made of adrenaline and murder? Zyra's sharp violet eyes flicked to him. I am fine. Uh-huh, Max said. See, I want to believe that, but you're standing like someone just challenged you to a duel, and you're waiting for them to draw their weapon. Zyra tilted her head slightly. That is the correct stance for such a situation. Max groaned, running a hand down his face. Lady, we are on a cargo ship, not a gladiator pit. Many cargo ships are attacked frequently. Not this one. Zyra raised a single brow. Okay, fine, not this one in the last month, Max admitted. But still, you can at least pretend to be at ease. Zyra stared at him for a long moment. Then, very deliberately, she lowered her arms and sat down on the nearest chair with the kind of precision that suggested she was doing it more as an experiment than out of actual comfort. Max folded his arms. There, was that so hard? Zyra didn't answer. Instead, she scanned the room again before asking, Why does your ship appear damaged? Max scowled. Hey, Rude, the Lucky Break is in perfectly acceptable condition. Zyra reached out and pressed a single finger against the edge of the table. It immediately wobbled, making a sad creaking sound. Max coughed. Okay, mostly acceptable condition. Before Zyra could comment further, the ship's comms crackled to life. Carter, we've got a problem. Max winced and tapped his earpiece. Relo, when don't we have a problem? Spare me the sarcasm. We've got an unidentified vessel tailing us. It's not hailing, not broadcasting an ID, and it's keeping just outside our scanner range. Either we picked up a secret admirer, or we're about to have a very bad day. Zyra was already standing before Max could respond. Her demeanor shifted instantly, the tension in the room sharpening like a blade being drawn. Show me. Max sighed. Oh, now you want to be involved. Still, he didn't argue. He led her to the bridge where Relo was seated in the captain's chair, arms crossed as she stared at the radar screen with the kind of expression that suggested she was actively resisting the urge to throw something. Max leaned over the console. Huh, that's not ominous at all. A single blip hovered at the edge of their long-range scanners, mirroring their movements perfectly. Not attacking, not signaling, just watching. Zyra studied the screen with narrowed eyes. It is waiting for something. Yeah, that's what worries me, Relo muttered. I don't like shadows playing coy. Max drummed his fingers on the console. So, what's the plan? We keep flying and hope they get bored? Zyra shook her head. Number, they are tracking me. Relo gave her a sharp look. You sure about that? Zyra's expression didn't waver. Yes. Max exhaled. Well, great. You've got a fan club and now they're stalking my ship. He turned to Relo. We could try losing them, cut the engine's drift, see if they overcorrect and expose themselves. Relo considered it. Risky, but doable. She glanced at Zira. You got any insights? Oh, great and terrifying one? Zyra seemed unbothered by the sarcasm. They are cautious. If they intend an attack, they will wait until we reach a more isolated location. They may be avoiding station patrols. Relo grimaced. Which means the second we leave this trade lane, they'll pounce. Max sighed, already regretting everything. Cool, fantastic. Love that for us. Then, as if the universe wanted to spite him, the proximity alarm blared. The unidentified vessel was moving, fast. Rilo cursed. They're closing in, shields up. Max barely had time to grip the edge of the console before the ship lurched, a violent impact rocking the lucky brake. The lights flickered, the overhead speakers crackling as the AI system warbled, structural integrity at 92%. Moderate hull damage sustained. Max gritted his teeth. All right, that was unnecessary. Zyra was already moving. Weapons? Relo grunted. You see the shape this ship's in? We've got one turret and a targeting system that only works when it feels like it. Max waved his arms. Hey, don't insult my ship while we're in a life-threatening situation. Another impact rocked the hull. Sparks flew from the main console as Relo swore under her breath. Zira exhaled, then turned toward the airlock. Max's stomach dropped. Where are you going? Zira didn't look back. To end this. Relo's eyes widened. Wait, are you seriously about to... Too late. The ship lurched again, and in a blur of motion, Zira was gone, moving with impossible speed as she made her way toward the external airlock. Max and Relo shared a look. Max groaned. Why do I have a bad feeling about this? Relo sighed. Because you have a working brain. Max threw his hands up. That's debatable at this point. And with that, they both ran after her, straight into whatever madness Zira had just decided was the solution to their very, very bad day. Max had long since accepted that he wasn't the bravest person in the galaxy. He was the kind of guy who firmly believed that running away from a problem was often the best solution. And yet, for reasons he was still trying to comprehend, he now found himself sprinting after Zira, who had just decided that launching herself into space was a perfectly reasonable response to being attacked. He skidded into the airlock chamber, nearly colliding with the bulkhead, as Relo cursed beside him. She actually did it, Relo growled. She actually just... Max pressed against the observation port, eyes wide as he watched Zira shoot out into the black void of space like some kind of warrior goddess who had completely abandoned the need for basic survival instincts. She wasn't even wearing a proper spacesuit, just her usual armored gear, though some kind of shimmering energy field now surrounded her body. Max had no idea what kind of tech it was, but considering she wasn't instantly freezing to death or suffocating, it had to be working. Okay, that's both the most terrifying and coolest thing I've ever seen, Max admitted. Relo didn't seem nearly as impressed. You absolute idiot, she muttered, hitting the comms. Zira, in case you missed it, space is big and dangerous. Care to explain what exactly your plan is before you get yourself killed? A moment of silence. Then Zira's voice came through the speakers, perfectly calm. I am going to board their ship. Max and Relo exchanged looks. Max cleared his throat. You mean that ship? He pointed at the enemy vessel, which was significantly larger than the lucky break and bristling with weapons. Yes, Relo pinched the bridge of her nose. All right, I'm done. She's insane. I'm officially saying it. Max threw up his hands. Oh, now you're saying it? Took you long enough? Out in space, Zyra was already in motion. She kicked off a piece of floating debris, propelling herself toward the enemy ship with alarming speed. The energy field around her shimmered, adjusting to the microgravity as she angled herself like a guided missile. Max couldn't stop staring. I feel like this is the part where we should be helping, but I genuinely have no idea how. Relo grumbled. Yeah, well, unless you've got some secret anti-gravity combat gear, we're stuck watching her pull off whatever ridiculous stunt she's got planned. As if to emphasize the point, Zira reached the enemy ship and latched onto the hull, with the kind of strength that should not have been possible. The cameras on the Lucky Break zoomed in just in time to show her punching the outer airlock controls, because of course she did, and forcing the doors open. The feed cut out. Max's stomach twisted. I don't know whether to be impressed or terrified. Relo exhaled. Why not both? Inside the enemy vessel, Zaira moved like a ghost. The moment she breached the airlock, the emergency systems tried to compensate, sealing the breach, stabilizing the oxygen levels, but the chaos she introduced was already spreading. Footsteps pounded down the corridors. Shouted voices filled the ship as panicked mercenaries rushed toward the disturbance. Zaira didn't wait for them to organize. She moved, slipping through the dimly lit hallways with the precision of a predator. The first mercenary she encountered barely had time to react before she grabbed him by the collar, slammed him into the bulkhead, and knocked him unconscious with a single strike. The second one actually managed to raise his weapon, right before Zaira yanked it from his hands, flipped it around, and shot him in the leg. He crumpled with a yelp. By the time the third mercenary arrived, Zaira was already moving again, disappearing deeper into the ship. She needed to find the bridge. Whoever was hunting her had been waiting for the right opportunity to strike. They had anticipated her movements, tracking her from Orion Station. That meant they had information, perhaps even a client. And if there was one thing Zaira knew about bounty hunters, it was that they never worked without a price. She intended to find out exactly who wanted her dead. Meanwhile, back on the Lucky Break, Max was stressing. Okay, think, he muttered, pacing back and forth. How do we not die horribly when our resident murder elf inevitably blows something up? Relo leaned against the console. Best bet, we get ready to move the moment she needs an exit. Max threw his arms up. And how exactly do we know when that is? As if on cue, the comms crackled to life. Zaira's voice came through, ever so slightly out of breath. I need extraction. Max blinked. Wow, that was fast. Rilo was already flipping switches. Where's your location? Bridge, Zaira replied. It is, occupied. Max frowned. Occupied as in you're winning, or occupied as in we're about to have a really bad time? A pause. Then Zaira's voice, ever so casual. A bit of both, Relo cursed. All right, strap in. We're making a move. Max scrambled to his seat, strapping in just as the ship lurched forward. The Lucky Break was not built for combat maneuvers, but Relo flew it like she wished it was. The engines roared, thrusters firing at maximum as the ship closed in on the enemy vessel. Deploying docking clamps, Relo announced, fingers flying across the controls. Carter, get ready to open the hatch. Max hurried toward the airlock, fingers hovering over the release switch. Okay, Zaira, you better be right there because we are not sticking around for... A loud bang interrupted him. The airlock door dented outward. Max's brain barely had time to process that before it happened again. Another massive impact, metal groaning under the force. Then, on the third strike, the door exploded inward, and Zaira landed in the entryway, breathing hard. Her armor was scuffed. She had what appeared to be scorch marks on her shoulder, and she was grinning. Max stared. Zaira exhaled. Go. Max slammed the button. The doors sealed shut just as the ship peeled away, leaving the mercenaries scrambling in confusion. Relo wasted no time. Strap in, people. We are leaving. The Lucky Break shook as the engines burned hot, propelling them away at full speed. Within moments, they were in open space again, free and clear. Max finally let out the breath he'd been holding. Okay, that was... something. Zaira turned to him, expression unreadable. Then she clapped him on the shoulder. You are useful. Max blinked, then grinned. I knew I'd win you over eventually. Zaira simply walked past him. You still talk too much. Relo laughed. He really does. Max sighed. You people have no appreciation for comedic genius. And just like that, their latest disaster came to an end, leaving Max with one undeniable truth. His life had officially gotten way more complicated. Max had officially decided that his life had gone from mildly chaotic to on the verge of catastrophic in record time. This realization came to him as he stood in the cockpit of the Lucky Break, staring at a holographic display of the ship's fuel reserves, which were now dangerously low. "All right," he said, rubbing his temples. "Let's go over the list of problems we currently have." Relo, seated at the helm, didn't look up. "Oh, this should be fun." Max took a deep breath. 1. We barely escaped a mercenary warship with our lives. 2. Our ship is running on fumes, and we definitely don't have enough credits to refuel. 3. We just picked a fight with people who really want Zira dead, which means we probably have a bounty on our heads now. Relo nodded. "Sounds about right." Max threw up his hands. "And yet somehow, the biggest problem we have is that Zira refuses to tell us why she's being hunted in the first place." At that moment, Zira, who had been silently leaning against the bulkhead, arms crossed, tilted her head. "It is complicated," she said simply. Max turned to her, exasperated. "Complicated? Zira, everything about you is complicated. You're an unkillable alien warrior with a galaxy-wide reputation for being terrifying. We just nearly got blown up because of you. I feel like we deserve an explanation." Zira remained frustratingly unreadable. "You are not owed anything, human," Max groaned. "Oh, great. We're back to that again." Relo sighed, finally spinning her chair to face them. "Look, we don't need your whole life story, Zira. But if people are chasing us now, we need to know who we're running from." For a long moment, Zira was silent. Then, finally, she exhaled and spoke. "They were Syndicate mercenaries." Max blinked. "The Syndicate? Zira gave him a flat look. "No, the other syndicate that hunts people for sport." Max turned to Relo. "Oh, great, so we're dealing with a galactic crime empire. That's fantastic. Super. Why not just add a killer AI and a time-traveling assassin while we're at it?" Zira ignored his dramatics. "They have been searching for me for some time. I expected them to find me eventually." Relo frowned. "Why? What did you do to tick them off?" Zira's jaw tightened. "I refuse to work for them." Max blinked. "That's it? That's all it takes to get on their hit list?" "They do not take rejection well." Max let out a low whistle. "Yikes. Guess they've got some serious abandonment issues." Relo frowned. "So, what do they want from you?" Zira hesitated. That alone sent up several warning flags. Finally, she answered, "I was valuable to them." Max narrowed his eyes. "Valuable how?" Zira didn't respond immediately. Instead, she turned her gaze to the holographic display as if lost in thought. When she finally spoke, her voice was lower than usual. "I was created for war," she said. "A weapon designed to be stronger, faster, and more durable than anything else. The Syndicate wanted to own me." Max felt a chill crawl up his spine. Zira always had an air of mystery about her, but this was different. Relo exhaled. "Well, that explains a lot." Max rubbed his face. Yeah, it does." Zira's expression didn't change. "I will not be owned." Max looked at her then, really looked at her. The tension in her shoulders, the guarded edge in her voice, the way she stood, always prepared to fight, always expecting a battle. For the first time he saw past the legend, past the terrifying warrior. Zira wasn't just running from the Syndicate, she was running from the life they had tried to force on her. He sighed. "Okay, so, plan A. We keep running until we figure something out." Relo groaned. "And when we inevitably run out of fuel?" Max grinned. "We go with plan B." Zira raised an eyebrow. "And plan B is—" Max clapped his hands together. "Find the shadiest fueling station we can and swindle our way into a free refill." Relo buried her face in her hands. "Oh, for the love of—" Zira actually smirked. "I like this plan." Max grinned. "See? She gets it." Relo muttered something under her breath about idiots and death wishes before punching in new coordinates. Max leaned back in his seat, exhaling. Things were getting way more dangerous, but for some reason he wasn't afraid. Maybe, just maybe, he trusted Zira to get them through this. Max had always considered himself a simple man with simple dreams. Haul cargo, avoid trouble, and definitely never make enemies with a galactic crime syndicate. And yet, here he was, sprinting down a dimly lit corridor inside a heavily armed Syndicate warship, dodging plasma fire, while Zyra carved through mercenaries like they were made of paper. So, you know. Another Tuesday. I just want to state, Max panted as he ducked behind a crate, for the record, that this plan is terrible. Zyra, standing completely unbothered in the open, deflected a blaster shot with the flat of her hand before yanking a rifle from an enemy's grip and knocking him unconscious with it. You suggested this plan, Max threw up his hands. Yeah, but I meant it sarcastically. You were the one who thought, oh yes, let's infiltrate a Syndicate battleship and dismantle their entire operation from the inside. Relo's voice crackled over the comms. Less arguing, more surviving, please. Zyra barely spared Max a glance before kicking open a security door and striding inside. Keep up, human, Max groaned but followed, muttering under his breath. Oh sure, let's all just keep up with the 7-foot-tall alien death goddess who doesn't even sweat. Inside the command center, alarms blared, red warning lights casting ominous shadows. Holographic screens flickered with status reports, detailing the Lucky Break still docked outside, its engines primed for an emergency getaway. Max glanced at the security monitors, just in time to see way too many Syndicate guards heading their way. A slight problem, he said. We've got company. And by company, I mean an entire angry mob with guns. Zyra didn't react. She was already focused on the control panel, fingers flying across the interface as she rewrote the ship's command protocols. Relo's voice crackled through the comms again. Zyra, please tell me you're almost done overriding their systems. Zyra's long ears twitched. Almost, Max swallowed. Define almost? A loud boom shook the ship. Relo's tone was very displeased. What the hell was that? Zyra continued typing. I disabled their weapons. It overloaded the core regulators. Max's stomach dropped. Wait, what? The ship will explode in 5 minutes. Max clutched his head. Oh, fantastic. That's so much time. I was worried we wouldn't get a chance to casually stroll back to our ship while everything around us turns into fire. Zyra ignored him, pressing one final command. The screens flickered before the ship's power grid shut down entirely, leaving them in dim emergency lighting. Relo's voice came through again, very urgently. I really hope that was you, Zyra. It was. Relo let out a breath. All right, I don't know how you just disabled an entire Syndicate flagship, but I love it. Now get back here before that thing blows. Max didn't need to be told twice. Time to go. They sprinted through the corridors, alarms blaring, the entire ship shaking from internal failures. The enemy forces were in total disarray, their weapon systems down, their defenses crumbling. Some were even fleeing, realizing the ship was doomed. Max and Zyra reached the docking bay, where the Lucky Break was waiting with the cargo ramp lowered. Relo was standing at the entrance, waving frantically. Move! 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 Zyra leapt up onto the ramp first, turning just in time to grab Max by the back of his jacket and hurl him inside as an explosion rocked the hangar. Max hit the floor with a grunt. You know, one day I'd love to board this ship without being thrown onto it. Zyra ignored him, already sealing the hatch. Relo, launch! On it! The ship roared to life, lifting off just as the Syndicate battleship suffered its final catastrophic failure. Through the viewport, they watched as the massive vessel buckled, its core rupturing, before it detonated in a spectacular explosion, sending debris scattering into space. Max, still lying on the floor, groaned. Well, that was needlessly dramatic. Relo laughed, hands steady on the controls. Hey, at least we made it out alive. Zyra exhaled, stepping back from the viewport. Her shoulders, usually tense, seemed to ease just slightly. Max sat up, still catching his breath. So, I'm assuming the Syndicate will be less inclined to chase you now? Zyra considered it. They have suffered a significant loss. They will not prioritize me anymore. Max grinned. Well, that's a relief. I was starting to think we'd have to spend the rest of our lives looking over our shoulders. Relo smirked. You still might. You did just help take down a major Syndicate warship. Max groaned. Can't we just once do something that doesn't make more people want to kill us? Relo and Zyra exchanged glances. Then, in unison, they both said, "No." Max sighed dramatically. Figures. Later, as the ship cruised through deep space, Max found Zira standing near the viewport, watching the stars. She was silent, lost in thought. Max stepped up beside her. "You okay?" She hesitated. Then, quietly, she said, "I am free." Max nodded, understanding. "Feels weird, doesn't it?" She looked at him. "What does?" "Having a future," Max said. "One that's yours." Zira didn't answer immediately, but then, slowly, she nodded. "Yes." Max smiled. "Well, good news. The future's a lot less scary when you've got people watching your back." Zira studied him for a long moment. Then, to his surprise, she smirked. "You are still an idiot, Max Carter." Max placed a hand over his heart. "I'll take that as a compliment." She shook her head but didn't deny it. And as they stood there, watching the stars stretch endlessly before them, Max realized something. Maybe, just maybe, he wasn't running from danger anymore. Maybe he was running towards something better.